So, I feel like I haven't talked much about trans issues lately, and I mean, we have the election and stuff, but a little bit of bad news out of the United Kingdom, some very anti-scientific stuff from Turf Island. Yeah, I thought we could take a look at it. So, puberty blockers, under 16s unlikely to be able to give informed consent. The NHS says that the clinic has suspended new referrals after pair, including woman who took blockers, win court case. Interesting. So let's take a look at this. Let's examine this happening. Children under the age of 16 considering gender reassignment are unlikely to be mature enough to give informed consent to be prescribed puberty blocking drugs, the High Court has ruled. Even in cases involving teenagers under 18, doctors may need to consult the courts for authorization for medical intervention, three senior judges have ruled, in action brought against the Tavistock and Portman NHS Trust, which runs the UK's main gender identity development service for children. So, essentially, courts have ruled that under 16s can't give consent to hormone blockers, which seems a little bit strange considering hormone blockers are kind of sort of only really useful when you're younger. They block puberty, that's their job. So let's take a look further. Do they have the details of the court case here? Wow, do they really not? Well, that's okay. I remember the details. Essentially, the gist of it was that there was a lawsuit brought against the NHS saying that essentially it is to give under 16s puberty blocking hormones is coercive because you're essentially you're essentially forcing them into future treatment. That's the gist of it. And in the ruling, the courts have agreed that you shouldn't be able to give puberty blockers to under 16s. So the girl in the pic is in the article is a detransitioner who is now transphobic and actively tries to take away trans healthcare because she is, and then you cut off. Does this person have any kind of media presence? Keira Bell began taking puberty blockers when she was 16 before detransitioning as an adult. Keira Bell has led The Rest Must Follow or Collude in Harm. Ooh, we got a lot of, we have a lot of weighted political language here in the article. News publication I am not familiar with. This week, Keira Bell stood on the steps of the High Court, victorious. She's the young woman who took the GIDS to court. She argued when she entered their care as a gender dysphoric young woman who had become convinced she could have been born a boy, the service should have challenged her more. Instead, she stepped onto a conveyor... Fuck off. A conveyor belt of affirmation that led to puberty suppressants, cross-sex hormones, and ultimately a double mastectomy. All of this she regrets. Fascinating. So the ultimate question here, basically, is about transitioning regret. That's the main question here. Fundamentally, it's if a kid goes on puberty blockers, to what extent are you leading them down a road they're going to regret? Now, hold on. Puberty blockers come with risks and permanent side effects. Everything comes with a risk, and everything comes with a side effect. The question is, are the consequences of puberty blockers severe enough to outweigh the good they can do? To which the answer is almost certainly no. And I'll talk about that. So, hold on. Vosh, I remember this case. The girl in question literally lied to a doctor and pretended to be suffering from conditions she knew she wasn't. She literally lied to the doctors. It is not even their fault in any way imaginable. Well, you should provide that information to me, if you could. Because I would like to see it. So, what does it mean to transition? Well, transitioning, well, actually, you can transition a lot of ways. There's social transition, whatever. So, medical transition is when a person is giving hormones, or in some cases surgery, to better have their body match whatever their self-perception is. Phenomenal. Great. Fantastic. Now, transitioning medically is an involved process that I think should only be done with extensive psychiatric and medical support. There is a myth amongst transphobes that, like, you can just walk into a clinic as a 15-year-old and, like, walk out with HRT. That is not the case at all. In the United Kingdom and in the United States, there is an incredibly extensive process, especially if you're a minor, which requires the involvement of medical professionals, therapy, psychiatric assessments to begin the process of transitioning. So that's all well and good. The issue is that hormone blockers aren't a part of that process. You can get on hormone blockers easier than you can start gender transition. And a lot of people are concerned about that because they consider hormone blockers to be a component of gender transition. The problem with that is that it's objectively, factually not. There are so many lies about hormone blockers. First of all, hormone blockers have been prescribed to kids since the 1980s. Since the 1980s. And before, to varying extents. You know, types of medicine, it varies, of course. But the basic principle is that it was applied to people who had hormonal disorders. You know, if you had a kid and they had some sort of gigantic, swollen, bulging thyroid that was pumping muscle juice into their entire body, and, you know, their whole body's going to explode, their skin shrink wrapped around the swelling meat balloon, you give them some hormone blockers. You're like, hey, chill out. You know, useful. Are there side effects to hormone blockers? Well, there are some studies which seem to indicate a varying degree of reduction in bone density. Though what's interesting is not only is the extent of this bone density vastly overstated by many of these critics, but this difference in bone density actually gets worse the later you start hormone therapy or hormone block therapy. Meaning that if there's like a 12-year-old, whatever, goes on hormone blockers, that individual is going to suffer fewer consequences than a 15-year-old who starts hormone blockers. Now, I'm not a doctor. I can't speak to the medical specifics. I don't know why that is exactly, but it seems to be the case, pretty clear as day, which is interesting. You would think that the earlier you start hormone blockers, the more severe the consequences, but what are you going to do? Hormone blockers are so useful for the reasons that I'm about to outline. If a person is transgender, there's a decent likelihood that they feel something called gender dysphoria. Not all trans people do. A lot of them do, though. And gender dysphoria, we'll just use simple language here. Gender dysphoria, they're not happy with how they look, basically. Their body, give or take. They got some problems with it. Could be trans girl got a penis. Could be trans guy doesn't have a gigantic, thick, luxurious beard. Whatever the case may be. Medical transition is a huge component of addressing this. And the problem is, the more you deviate from your preferred body type, the more severe dysphoria is going to be down the line. And dysphoria has real consequences, okay? Very real consequences down the line. So let me give you, an example, all right? So if you were, let's say you're a trans girl, okay? You're a trans girl, but you're pre-everything, no transition. Now, if you were to start transitioning, if you were to want to get started in that process and you wanted to look traditionally feminine, would you rather start that process after having undergone male puberty or not? Because while the circumstances vary, I would say a person who has not undergone male puberty is probably going to have an easier time dealing with that dysphoria than a person who looks, say, like me. Of course, it varies. There are some very masculine pre-transition trans women who ended up looking very feminine after transition being trans women. There's a lot of individual variants, but generally speaking, it seems to help. And puberty blockers are incredible in how effective they are at alleviating future medical and psychological problems. Now, a lot of people say this isn't like a worthwhile trade-off because, like, the violation of the consent of the kid. First of all, it takes a lot of medical intervention to get any of these processes started. Nobody's just walking in and out of a goddamn day clinic. Nobody's going in and out of an urgent care center off a $70 copay and walking out with hormone blockers or HRT, okay? The doctors are there for these steps. And I believe that these doctors should be held to a high standard of scrutiny. Because it is possible that there are doctors who are way too permissive with allowing young people to transition. That is a thing that can happen. It is a possibility. I think many accusations of that being the case by the right or by transphobes are unfounded, but it's a thing that can theoretically happen, so we should be careful. And I agree with us being careful. But right now, I don't think we're doing a bad job. And here's the reason why, motherfuckers. I brought you some data. Sorry. Abstract. A survey study of surgeons' experience with regret and/or reversal of gender confirmation surgeries. Essentially, the study is on the extent to which people regret transitioning. 46 surgeons responded to the survey. 67% of providers have been in practice for greater than 10 years in the US and Europe, and were asked to select a range representing the number of trans patients they have surgically treated, and this amounted to a cumulative number of approximately 23,000. 23,000 patients. Now that's the sample size. Treated by the cohort. 49% of respondents had never encountered a patient who regretted their gender transition or were seeking detransition care. 12 providers encountered one such patient, and the rest encountered more than one patient. This amounted to a total of 62 patients. So according to the surgeons who responded to this survey, 62 patients out of 23,000 claimed that they regretted some element of their transition or attempted a detransition or something to that effect. There were 13 patients who regretted chest surgery or detitification, and 45 who regretted genital surgery. Notice that the vast majority of those who did experience regret experienced regret for surgeries, not for hormone therapy. Surgeries are more serious. The composition of the patients who sought detransition is as follows: 16 trans men, 37 trans women, and 6 non-binary patients. The most common reason cited for detransition was change in gender identity. So they changed their mind, basically, which, I mean, fine, if they want to. Followed by rejection or alienation from family or social support. So 8 of them detransitioned just because of the backlash they got for transitioning, which is really sad. Difficulty in romantic relationships, also sad. Chronic post-operative pain was also cited as a reason for detransition. And then we have very disgusting descriptions of the potential negative consequences for genital surgery, which, to be fair, those are real things that can happen. You know, you're fucking around with dicks and balls down there, you know. Who knows the wacky consequences that can be. The point that I'm getting at is that detransitioning is exceptionally rare. Exceptionally rare. And sometimes when it happens, it's not even because there was really a mistake in the process. It's because of other things. A lot of people detransition because they don't have the money to continue hormone therapy anymore. TERFs would argue these numbers are underestimated because not every detransitioner reports back. Then it's on them to prove that. But they've consistently failed to. They have consistently failed to. The myth that trans people often regret their transition has always been exactly that. It has been a myth. There are some trans people who regret it. And in order to minimize that regret, we should do everything possible to ensure that trans people know what the fuck they're getting into before they transition. And that's why I'm okay with there being a bit of a delay in the process. It sucks, but I would much rather a trans girl have to go through a prolonged medical process to begin transition than I would people being able to get into this process on a whim. We should be very careful about long-lasting medical procedures, especially with underage people. So the argument that hormone blockers are bad because trans people often regret transition is bunk. The argument that hormone blockers are bad because they have unknown long-term side effects, also undemonstrated, also factually untrue. The argument that it negates the consent of the child because they shouldn't be able to involve themselves in these medical procedures, that's not true. There are tons of medical procedures kids can do. You just have to make sure you're doing it to help them and not hurt them. There are tons of them. There are tons of people who get surgeries when they're kids, or who get what I'll tell you this: when people say stuff like a kid shouldn't be able to make decisions about that, that's because they think that transitioning is a cosmetic procedure. That's what they believe. That's the common argument. You can always tell from how they address it. You know, kids shouldn't be making decisions about stuff like that. They treat it like it's a tattoo, but it's not a tattoo. Properly handling gender dysphoria is something which could conceivably abet or severely worsen medical conditions down the line. It has a huge effect on psychiatric care down the line. It's not cosmetic. There are cosmetic elements to it, but it is not cosmetic. Transitioning saves lives. So the cosmetic argument doesn't work. Kids can get tattoos. Yeah, but it's irrelevant because we're not talking cosmetics here. We're talking about whatever medical procedures best help the health of the kid or of just adult trans people. A lot of people approach this from a highly ideological perspective, but to me, I just follow the research. The research right now seems pretty confident that hormone blockers are a helpful tool in setting underage people up potentially to transition. However, they're reversible, so even if you get off them hormone blockers, you're fine down the line. You're all good. If it turns out there was a bunch of data showing that there were real negative consequences to giving hormone blockers to young people, I would advocate against them. In fact, you can hold me to that, and I'll say it right here. If there is some big extensive meta-analysis on hormone blockers, and it turns out that maybe actually the bone density thing is a really huge problem, or maybe it turns out that the positive effects were overstated, I will stop supporting them. And I will call out people who still support them in spite of that evidence. 100%. I don't have some ideological predisposition to as many people being trans as possible. I just want people to be happy and healthy. That's it. And right now that points towards the hormone blocker thing. The argument used in this court case are insane. That children can't consent to medical procedures. This is factually incorrect. We do this all the time, as long as it's done responsibly. And the idea that accepting hormone blockers means you have to transition later, this is also not the case. So it's a foolish court ruling that I feel is inspired more by ignorance and fear than one which is inspired by the current academic literature on the subject. But of course, people who have problems with trans people don't tend to be motivated by the academic literature. We have some sort of account from a person who was there. There's only one trans journalist covering the major court case about trans people and puberty blockers. I first covered this case in January. It's been brought against the GIDS by Mrs. A, the anonymous mother of a 16-year-old trans child. Wait, in the UK, you can file lawsuits and be anonymous? Is that allowed? Wait, can you do that in the US? She wants to prevent taking puberty blockers. And Keira Bell, a 23-year-old woman who took puberty blockers age 16 and now regrets that decision. Um, Hormone blockers do what the name suggests. One of the arguments the court heard against puberty blockers relies on a study of sheep. Yes, really, Jeremy Hyam QC, the barrister for Mrs. A and Keira Bell, claimed puberty blockers affect neurological development of children, and his evidence for this was based on emerging evidence in sheep. Ah, so that's what the people in chat were saying earlier. There were people in in chat who were saying like, what affects neurological development? And this must be where they got it from, the sheep thing. Hold on. Vosh, master's student studying bioethics. Here, we do allow adolescents to consent to some limited procedures, such as birth control, but the vast majority use a standard of medical assent, not consent. Yeah, of course. That's what I've been saying. You need medical, you want doctors and therapists and psychiatrists to be following. What I would like ideally is that if a child is demonstrating like gender dysphoric tendencies, that they should be paired up with a therapist who specializes in this sort of thing, and that you could be with them for a long time, 6 months, a year, and you can work with them and with other psychiatric professionals to eventually arrive at some consensus about your health. That's what we do already to an extent. Like we already basically do that in the US and the UK. So I don't just mean consent like the kid wants it. I mean like the medical professionals around them have to agree to it. Bosch, I can vouch that Bell's story is bullshit. Gender care in the UK does actually properly question you and hold at least 4 months between initial assessment and HRT. Yeah, that's why they do that. The reason they do that is to make sure that it's not on a whim. Personally, I showed the slightest hesitation. They gave me additional psychotherapy and aid before they let me access HRT. This was at age 17, and they're significantly more critical of you if you're under 16. Yeah, because if you're 17 in the UK, you're an adult, right? Their age of consent's 16 in the UK. So at 17, you're legally an adult there? Is that how it works? Or is the age of consent different from the age of majority? The age of majority is still 18 over there? 18, you're an adult. Okay, so 18. So even more so under 16. Okay, gotcha. Those trying to block trans kids' healthcare crowdfunded about £100,000 to fund this case against Tavistock. Okay. Only 161 trans kids were referred for puberty blockers last year. Puberty blockers aren't even used that much. I know, I mean, the UK, not the US or whatever. But yeah, puberty blockers aren't like a super common medical procedure. They're usually only deployed when there's like a tremendous consensus that it's good to do. Vosh, master student again. I agree and can't fit my longer point in the chat limit, but basically the best argument against this ruling IMO is that hormone blockers sit very comfortably within the range of procedures that would be appropriate using the pediatric best interest standard for surrogate medical decision making. To everything that I've read, that does sound correct. The hearing was plagued by technical difficulty. I don't know what this refers to. This article seems fairly biased. I'd be interested in reading more about this sheep thing. Yeah. Probably Zoom issues. Well, sure, but yeah, whatever. Anyway, the point that I'm getting at right now, is that currently the standard of care for young people, excuse me, looking to get gender affirming care or hormone blockers seems to be it seems to be fine in the US or the UK. Arguably, it's not good enough in the sense that it's too strict. In the UK, for example, I know that there are incredibly stringent limitations and restrictions on the conditions necessary to engage in medical transition. But the idea that like kids are just walking out of doctors' offices getting their hormones blocked, no, it's not true. It's not true at all. And from what I can see, this Keira Bell individual doesn't seem to be so much a disaffected individual as they are a figurehead for anti-transgender political activism in the UK. womensplaceuk.org. I like that. If you type in Keira Bell, the 5th site down is undeniably a TERF site. womensplaceuk.org. Jesus. The Economist. Yeah. Children under 16, gender 4, unlikely to be able to give informed consent to undergo treatment with puberty blocking drugs. 3 high court judges have ruled. She argued the clinic should have challenged her more over her decision to transition to a male as a teenager. That argument is not the same as the argument that the court ruled on. Even if she believes she personally didn't receive a good enough standard of care, that's not an argument against the general ability to prescribe hormone blockers. It's doubtful a child age 14 or 15 can understand away the long-term risks and consequences of the administration of puberty blockers. Well, that's why they're reversible. If they weren't reversible, nobody would ever prescribe them. They would be way too dangerous. There was somebody in chat earlier who said that this individual lied. Is there any evidence of that? Any evidence this individual lied to the doctors? Maybe try Googling Keira Bell lie. You know what? Sure. Let's try Keira Bell lied to doctors. Thank you for suggesting that. I do have Google. Gender GP statement in response to Keira Bell versus Tavistock. No, that's not it. We just looked at that one. This is the Daily Mail. What I don't understand is the claim that keeps getting made in these articles is that Keira Bell wasn't challenged enough by her doctors, but the ruling for the court has nothing to do with it. The ruling for the court, what? Fuck you. The ruling for the court isn't about being challenged enough. The ruling for the court is about informed consent from minors to have puberty blockers. So I don't know why they keep bringing that up. A barrister's take on this? Cringe. I think this guy might be British. Oof. Lawyer's commentary on the ruling. Very disturbing development. The High Court today. Yeah. The arguments for all of this seem extremely shaky. I sincerely doubt, by the way, that this court ruling will stand for very long. How do you deal with people that dismiss trans people as mentally ill? It's irrelevant. Even if you think that being trans is mentally ill, the only goal for a medical professional is how do we maximize good and minimize harm. That's it. That's your only job. That's it. There's no other job. That's the only one. So even if you think all trans people are crazy mentally or whatever, if it turns out that prescribing hormone blockers and, gender affirming care, if it leads to positive outcomes, then that's it. That's the argument right there. That's all you got to do. Why do we call them Britbongers? I don't even know. I don't even know why we call them Britbongers. I do not even know. I've been on the waiting years for 7 years currently. They refused to put me further because wasn't sure they're holding it against me. Yeah, here's my suggestion. If you're trans, get out of the fucking UK. If you can, move out of the UK. Swim across the English Channel to France, or wait for an international incident and you board your military vessels and jump off into the Atlantic and swim over to Ellis Island, okay? Yeah. Or go to Ireland. Yeah. What are the Irish? What are they on with trans people? Are they okay? Are they better? Are they worse? How are they doing? Ireland is worse? It's not surprising to me. They're all Catholics over there, right? They're probably fairly conservative. Yeah. Worse? Okay. Not to Ireland then. Sorry. Canada kind of sucks. Well, to be fair, none of these places are good for trans people. There aren't any countries that are like great for trans people. We're working on it though. Oh yeah, maybe Scotland. I don't know. Is this legal ruling? Is it for all the UK, or is it just for that branch of the NHS? And follow up, does that branch of the NHS operate in Scotland? I genuinely don't know. NHS in Scotland is a separate entity? Oh, nice. Well, then you can go to Scotland, people. Liberate Scotland. Yeah, get out of there.